There is a moment, right before you speak, when everything is still yours. You feel it in your chest first, a tightening. Someone has just said something designed to reach in and turn a key inside you, and for a fraction of a second, the whole room is waiting to see which version of you answers. The version that reacts, or the version that doesn't. You know this moment. You have lived it in kitchens, in meetings, in comment sections, in the front seat of a car with someone who knows exactly which sentence will make your hands shake. And in that moment, something ancient in you wants to answer fire with fire, because it has been taught, since childhood, that stillness looks like weakness and silence looks like defeat. But you are about to learn something that very few people ever learn in a single lifetime. The person who stays calm in that moment is not the one who lost. They are the only one in the room who was never actually playing the game. You know exactly what this feels like, because it has happened to you more than once. Someone raises their voice, and yours wants to rise to meet it, like two waves colliding out of some old, stupid instinct that says loud must be answered with loud. Someone insults you in front of others, timed precisely so that your reaction becomes the story instead of their cruelty. Someone brings up your past, your mistakes, your worst day, and slides it casually into conversation, watching your face for the flinch. You have felt your pulse jump in your ears. You have felt your jaw tighten before you even knew you were angry. You have replayed conversations at 2 in the morning, rewriting what you should have said, sharper, colder, more devastating, because in the moment you froze, or worse, you snapped, and neither felt like winning. This is not a story about weakness. This is a story about a war you have been fighting your entire life without knowing its real name. It is not a war against the people who provoke you. It is a war for the only territory that has ever truly belonged to you, your own composure, your own mind, the 4 inches behind your eyes where nobody has ever been allowed to live rent-free until you let them in. And every time you raise your voice to match theirs, every time you let your face contort into their reflection, every time you give them the tears, the shouting, the trembling hands they were hunting for, you hand over a piece of that territory, not because they are stronger, because you forgot for 1 second that it was yours to defend. Provocation has a mechanism. It is not random cruelty. It is a request. Someone who provokes you is asking you a question with their behavior, even if they don't know they're asking it. The question is simple. Are you controlled by what happens to you, or by what you decide to do about it? Most people spend their whole lives answering that question wrong, over and over, without ever noticing they've been asked. They think the provocation is the event. It isn't. The event is neutral. It is a stimulus, arriving in the world exactly like weather arrives. Indifferent, uncaring whether you are ready for it. What happens next is not weather. What happens next is entirely, terrifyingly, beautifully yours. There was a man in ancient Rome named Cato, and history remembers him not for the wars he won but for a moment in the Senate when a political rival, furious and outmatched in argument, walked up to him and spat directly in his face in front of the entire chamber. Every man in that room expected violence. Cato wiped his face slowly with the back of his hand and said only this: "I will tell everyone that they are wrong, who say that you cannot spit with your mouth full of insults." Then he continued, speaking as though nothing had happened. Not because he felt nothing. He was a man, not a stone. But because he understood something that took most of humanity another 2,000 years to even approach in a philosophy textbook. The spit was never the attack. The attack was the expectation that he would lose himself in response to it, and he simply declined the invitation. This is the part almost nobody tells you, because it doesn't sound dramatic enough for a highlight reel. Staying calm is not about suppressing what you feel. It is not about swallowing rage until it calcifies into something worse. That is a different failure wearing the same costume. Real calm, the kind that actually protects you, is not the absence of feeling. It is the presence of a gap, a small, deliberate space between what happens to you and what you choose to do about it. Viktor Frankl, a man who survived a concentration camp, who watched everything a human being can lose actually be taken from him, wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. He did not write that from comfort. He wrote it from the bottom of the worst thing humanity has ever built. If a man who survived that can find the gap, you can find it across a dinner table. You can find it in a group chat. You can find it staring at a message from someone who used to matter to you and no longer deserves the privilege of your reaction. Here is the truth underneath the truth. When someone provokes you, they are almost never actually angry at the thing they claim to be angry at. They are angry that they do not have power over you, and they are testing whether a loud enough noise can create that power where none currently exists. Provocation is a bid for control disguised as an argument. It rarely comes from strength. It comes from a person standing on unstable ground, trying to knock you off yours so the two of you are equally unsteady, because equally unsteady feels to them survivable. Misery does not simply love company. Misery requires it. A person at peace does not need to destabilize you to feel okay. Only a person already destabilized needs that. You have met this person. Maybe you have been related to this person. The coworker who cannot simply disagree with an idea. They have to make it personal, has to imply you're incompetent, has to raise their voice just enough that everyone in the meeting turns to look at you instead of them. The family member who cannot let a holiday pass without finding the one sentence that will unravel you, precisely worded, precisely timed like they've been saving it. The ex who reappears not because they miss you, but because your peace, your visible, undeniable peace, is an insult to the chaos they still live in. None of these people are provoking you because you are weak. They are provoking you because some part of them, conscious or not, recognizes that you have something they don't. And the fastest way to feel like you have it too is to drag you back down into the mud where they are standing. Say this to yourself, quietly, and mean it. Their noise is not evidence of your failure. It is evidence of their need. There is a story, less famous than Cato's but no less precise, about a Zen master who was approached by a young warrior. The warrior wanted to know if heaven and hell were real, and demanded the master explain it to him immediately, arrogantly, with his hand already resting on the hilt of his sword. The master looked him over slowly and said, "You're a disgusting-looking man. You study under a worthless teacher, your sword is dull, and you probably couldn't even use it properly." The warrior, incensed, drew his sword, face red, ready to kill him on the spot. The master said calmly, "That is hell." The warrior froze, understanding rushing over him, and slowly sheathed his blade. Bowing in gratitude for the lesson, the master said, "And that is heaven." The lesson was never about heaven or hell as places you go after you die. It was about what a single provocation, aimed correctly, can turn a person into within seconds, and what it means to be the kind of person who can be pulled all the way to the edge of violence and still choose to step back. That is the entire difference between the people history remembers as strong and the people history barely remembers at all. Not that the strong never felt the pull toward the edge. They felt it exactly as sharply as anyone else. The difference is what they did in the half-second after feeling it. You are not being asked to become numb. Numbness is not the goal, and anyone who tells you to simply not care is selling you a version of peace that is actually just disconnection wearing a calmer outfit. You are allowed to feel the sting when someone insults you. You are allowed to feel your blood rise when someone lies about you, mocks you, tries to humiliate you in front of people whose opinion matters to you. Feeling it is not the failure. The failure is mistaking the feeling for an instruction. A feeling is information, it is not a command. Anger tells you that a boundary has been crossed. It does not require you to hand your voice, your dignity, your composure over to the person who crossed it, as though your reaction is now their property to shape. Think, for a moment, about what actually happens when you stay calm while someone else is unraveling. Picture it exactly. Their voice rises, their face changes shape with the effort of trying to provoke you. Their words get sharper, more personal, more desperate, because the first round didn't land the way they wanted. And you say less. Your voice doesn't climb to meet theirs. Your face doesn't contort into a mirror of their anger. You look at them the way you'd look at weather rolling in. Noted, acknowledged, unthreatening to your foundation. What happens to a person, mid-tantrum, when they realize the other person in the room isn't going to give them what they're demanding? Watch them next time. They escalate once more, harder, almost pleading now, even if it doesn't sound like pleading. And when that still doesn't work, something remarkable happens. They deflate. Not because you won an argument, because there was never an argument to win in the first place. Only a performance that required an audience willing to panic, and you decline to be that audience. Your stillness is not passive. It is the loudest thing in the room. There's a particular kind of pain in this. The pain of being provoked by someone who used to be close to you. Someone whose opinion once mattered so much that a single sideways comment from them could ruin your whole week. That kind of provocation cuts differently because it isn't just an attack. It's a memory attacking you at the same time. You remember when their voice was safe. You remember when their anger used to genuinely frighten you into folding. And some old wiring in your brain still expects that old outcome. Still braces for the version of you that used to apologize just to make the noise stop. Used to shrink just to keep the peace. Used to hand over your composure like it was theirs to take. Because for years in that relationship, it functionally was. This is where staying calm becomes something more than a technique. It becomes proof. Proof to yourself before it is ever proof to them that you are not who you were when this pattern started. The old you might have cried. The old you might have shouted back, said something you regretted, given them the ammunition of your own worst moment to use against you later. The you standing here now, the one who has been through enough to finally understand what's actually happening in these moments, does something different. Not because you don't feel it, because you finally understand what the feeling is for, and it isn't for handing over control. Consider the second story, this one closer to our own time. There was a boxer, one of the greatest to ever step into a ring, known as much for his mind as his hands. Before a fight against a younger opponent who had spent weeks in interviews mocking him, calling him old, calling him finished, taunting him with a cruelty clearly designed to provoke recklessness, this boxer said something to a reporter that most people misunderstood at the time. He said, "I've already beaten him. I beat him the moment I decided his words don't get to choose how I fight." On fight night, the younger man came out swinging wide, angry, throwing everything early, burning himself out on his own provocation, trying to end things fast because his whole strategy was built on being underestimated and offended in equal measure. The older man moved like a man conserving something precious. He absorbed the noise. He let the younger fighter empty himself out in the first 3 rounds, and by the 6th there was nothing left to fight with but exhaustion. The fight was never decided by fists. It was decided in the space between provocation and response, and only one man in that ring understood there was a space there at all. You are in a ring more often than you realize. Every provocation is a bell. Every reaction you don't need to have is a round you win without throwing a single punch. Here is where the reframe deepens, because staying calm is not simply a defensive posture. It is not merely about protecting yourself from looking foolish or losing an argument. It is about something far more valuable, something almost nobody explains to you when you're young and still learning who you're going to become. Every time you choose calm over chaos, you are not just surviving the moment. You are building a person. You are laying down, brick by brick, a version of yourself that other people cannot move with words. And once that version of you exists, once it's real, once it's been tested and held under pressure enough times that it's no longer theoretical, nothing anyone says to you again will ever quite land the way it used to. Not because you've become cold, because you've become someone who is no longer available to be destabilized on command. There's a term for this that borrows from an old idea, the idea of the citadel. A person becomes, over time, an internal fortress, one that cannot be stormed from the outside, no matter how hard someone throws themselves against the walls, because the gates were never actually on the outside to begin with. They are internal. They open only from within, only by your own choice, and no one, not the coworker, not the ex, not the family member who's been testing your limits since you were a child, has ever actually had a key. They only had the illusion of one, an illusion you handed them, piece by piece, every time you reacted instead of responded. You are not required to explain your calm to anyone. That's important enough to say twice in different words. When you stop reacting the way you used to, some people will accuse you of being cold, distant, changed. Let them think that. Their discomfort with your stillness is not your problem to solve. In fact, their discomfort is often the clearest evidence that the stillness is working exactly as it should. People who benefited from your reactivity will always be the first to complain when it disappears. Not because you've done something wrong, because you've taken away a tool they didn't know they were relying on until it stopped being available. Think about what it actually costs you every single time you give someone your reaction on demand. It costs you time, the hours afterwards spent replaying it, defending yourself in your head to someone who isn't even there. It costs you energy. The physical toll of a nervous system spiked into fight mode over something that, 3 days later, won't even matter. And it costs you something harder to name but easier to feel. A small erosion of the belief that you are the one steering your own life. Every reactive outburst, no matter how justified it might have felt in the moment, is a tiny admission that someone else's behavior gets to decide your internal state. Do that enough times, across enough years, and you wake up one day wondering why you feel like a passenger in your own existence, wondering why your mood seems to be set by other people's choices instead of your own. This is not about becoming passive. Do not mistake calm for permission for people to treat you badly. Calm is not the same as tolerance. You can be perfectly still, perfectly composed, and still walk away from a person entirely. You can stay calm and still end a relationship, end a job, end a friendship, cut contact completely. Calm is not about staying in the room. Calm is about who you are while you decide whether to stay in the room at all. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who thrives on provoking you is not to scream back. It is to look at them with total clarity, unclouded by rage, and make a decision about them from a place of stillness instead of heat. Decisions made in anger are usually decisions you have to revisit later. Decisions made in calm tend to be the ones that actually hold. There's a third example worth sitting with. An older one, from a philosopher who spent years as a slave before becoming one of the most quietly influential thinkers of the ancient world. He taught that it is not events that disturb people, but their judgments about events. A man insults you, that is the event. Whether you are disturbed by it depends entirely on the judgment you attach to it afterward. The story you tell yourself about what the insult means, whether it's true, whether it deserves your energy. He used to tell his students that if someone told them their body was ugly, they wouldn't be offended, because they know their body and know what it looks like. But if someone insults their character, their intelligence, their worth, and it lands like a blow, it's not because the insult is more powerful. It's because some part of them privately suspects it might be true. And that suspicion, not the words themselves, is what actually does the damage. Provocation only fully works on the places inside you that are already unsure of themselves. The more solid your own understanding of who you are, the less any outside voice, however loud, however cruel, however precisely aimed, can actually move you. This is worth sitting with longer than a single sentence deserves, because it explains something that has probably confused you for years. Why the same insult can devastate you on one day and roll off you completely on another. It was never about the insult's power. It was about your certainty. On the days you were unsure of yourself, the words found a crack and widened it. On the days you knew exactly who you were, the same words simply had nowhere to land. So the real work underneath all of this was never really about learning to stay calm in the moment someone provokes you. That's the visible symptom. The real work is becoming someone whose sense of self does not require external agreement to remain intact. A person who is certain of their own worth does not need to win every argument, because losing an argument doesn't threaten their identity. A person who has made peace with their own history does not flinch when someone brings up their past, because the past has already been examined, understood, and folded quietly into who they've become, instead of being left as an open wound someone else can press on for sport. Calm is not a mask you put on in the moment of provocation. Calm is the natural output of a person who has done the harder, quieter, less glamorous work long before the provocation ever arrived. You have to build that person on ordinary days, not dramatic ones. The moment someone raises their voice at you is not the moment you develop composure. That moment only reveals whether you already have it. Composure is built in silence, in solitude. In the small private decisions nobody applauds, the decision to sit with an uncomfortable feeling instead of numbing it, the decision to examine why a particular comment stings instead of simply reacting to the sting, the decision to keep a promise to yourself when no one is watching to confirm you kept it. Every one of those unremarkable, unwitnessed choices is a deposit into the same account you'll draw from the next time someone tries to provoke you into abandoning yourself. People who seem to have unshakable composure under pressure did not get it from a single moment of willpower. They got it from years of unglamorous discipline that nobody saw and nobody praised, and that is exactly why it holds when the pressure finally comes. There's a fourth story, quieter than the others, that deserves telling here. A young woman, early in her career, worked under a manager who made it something of a hobby to publicly correct her in meetings, always with a tone just sharp enough to embarrass her, always timed for maximum audience. For months, she went home and cried, replayed every meeting, drafted furious emails she never sent, lost sleep rehearsing comebacks for confrontations that never actually happened. Because in the room, in the moment, she froze, and the freeze felt worse than anything she could have said. Then, slowly, something shifted. Not because the manager changed. He never did. She changed her relationship to the moment itself. She began to notice, with something like scientific curiosity, the half-second right before her chest would tighten. And in that half-second, she started asking herself a single question. What does this cost me if I let it land? Over weeks, that half-second stretched. She started answering the manager in a flat, even, unbothered tone, not performing calm, but actually finding it. Because she had done the work in private long enough that the public moment simply had less to grab onto. 6 months later, colleagues started commenting on how unbothered she seemed under pressure, as though it were a personality trait she'd always had. It wasn't. It was a decision, repeated so many times in private that it eventually looked, from the outside, like an identity. That is what you are actually building. Every time you choose stillness over reaction, not a performance for other people to witness. An identity that eventually stops requiring effort because it has become who you are rather than something you're doing. There is something else worth saying plainly because most people skip past it in their hurry to sound wise. Staying calm does not mean staying silent forever. There is a version of composure that curdles into avoidance, where a person tells themselves they're being stoic when really they're just afraid of confrontation, afraid of conflict, afraid of the discomfort of speaking a hard truth out loud. That is not the calm being described here. Real calm can say the hardest sentence in the room, at exactly the right volume, without a single ounce of the shaking, pleading, desperate energy that makes provoked people say things they regret. The calm person can say no. The calm person can say that hurt me. The calm person can say we're done, or I won't be speaking to you again. or you don't get to talk to me like that, and say it once, clearly, without raising their voice, without repeating it 3 times to make sure it landed, without following it with tears or apology or over-explanation. Calm is not the absence of confrontation. Calm is confrontation with nothing wasted on it. The people who provoke you are, in a strange way, always testing for the same thing. They are asking whether you will do the work for them, whether your reaction will hand them the outcome they wanted, without them having to actually earn it through anything real. The coworker who baits you into snapping in a meeting doesn't have to prove you're difficult to work with. You just proved it for them, on camera, in front of witnesses. The family member who provokes you into a screaming match at dinner doesn't have to explain why the relationship is strained. You just demonstrated it for everyone at the table. The ex who needles you into a furious message doesn't have to convince anyone that you're not over it. You just sent the evidence yourself, time-stamped. Every reaction you hand over on demand is evidence you're manufacturing for someone else's narrative, free of charge, on their timeline, in their favor. And every time you decline to hand it over, the story simply doesn't get written. Not because nothing happened, because you refuse to co-author it. Let that sit for a second. They are not asking you to be quiet. They are asking you to write their story for them. And you are allowed to put the pen down. Think about how differently your life would already look if this had been true for you 5 years ago. Think about the arguments you wouldn't have had, the relationships that might have ended cleanly instead of with a final ugly explosion neither of you can quite look back on with peace. Think about the version of you that could have simply looked at certain people, certain comments, certain provocations, and felt the old pull rise up, and let it pass through without grabbing the wheel. That version of you was always possible. It didn't require different circumstances or kinder people around you. It required a different relationship to the half-second between stimulus and response, and that relationship is available to you starting now, today. In whatever conversation is waiting for you after this one ends, there will be a next time. That's not pessimism, that's just how people work. Someone will say something soon, maybe today, maybe this week, designed or not, to pull you off your center. And when it happens, you will feel the old current rise in your chest exactly the way it always has. That feeling is not a malfunction. It is not proof that you've failed at any of this. It is simply the body doing what bodies do. The only question that matters is what happens in the half-second after the current rises. Whether you become its passenger or you simply notice it, name it, and choose your next move from somewhere steadier. That half-second is the entire battlefield. Nothing else about the confrontation matters nearly as much as what you do inside that tiny window. Because everything else, their volume, their cruelty, their timing, their audience, is a variable you were never going to control anyway. The only variable that was ever truly yours is the one hiding in that gap. So here is what this actually asks of you. Stripped of all the stories and all the philosophy and all the history, the next time someone raises their voice to pull you down to their level, you do not have to go. The next time someone says something engineered to make you flinch, you are allowed to simply notice the engineering and decline the invitation. The next time your chest tightens and your hands want to shake and your voice wants to climb to meet theirs, you are allowed to take the extra half-second. The one Frankl found in a place that had taken everything else from him. The one Cato found with someone else's spit still on his face. The one that separates the person who leaves a confrontation shrunken from the person who leaves it exactly as whole as they walked in. This is not about winning. Stop thinking about winning. Winning implies there was ever a real contest, and there wasn't. There was only a person trying to borrow your composure because they've run out of their own, and a decision, made quietly in the space no one else can see, about whether you're willing to lend it to them. You are not. Not today, not the next time, not the time after that. You are going to feel the provocation exactly as sharply as you always have. and you are going to let it pass through you like weather passing over stone. Noted, acknowledged, and utterly unable to move what has already decided not to be moved. That is the whole secret, and it was never really a secret at all. It was just a decision, waiting for you to finally make it. Stay calm, not because nothing touches you, because you have finally understood what actually belongs to you, and you are done handing it away for free.